Okay, everyone. I think we can start. So good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for being here. Welcome to this LabPlas high-level dialogue on plastic governance. This is organized by the Atlantic International Research Center and supported by the EU-funded LabPlas Project. So my name is André Valente, and I'm a project officer at the Atlantic International Research Center, and I'll be moderating this event. So we will talk about plastic pollution. We will cover many topics from different perspectives. We will discuss what is being done in Europe from European programs and actions, as well as in the industry to tackle this complex problem. And we will also talk about the LabPlas project and its research. We will cover LabPlas is a very broad project, focusing many topics. Here we will mostly talk about sources, biodegradability, and tyre particle emissions. We have a very distinct panel of speakers. I'm very happy to be here. We will have two sessions. The first one is on plastic governance, and with the second with the LabPlas project. And in the end, we have a 20 minutes roundtable with some discussion and questions. I will encourage all participants to write questions on the question and answer box, not in the chat, preferably in the question and answer box. And then we can resume these questions, and I will ask these questions in the end. So we will have presentations from everyone, and then in the end, the question and answers. So there is a slight change in the program. We were starting with Sigi Gruber, but now we will start with Mustafa Aydin, and Sigi will be the third speaker. So they replace. This is we felt this was better because Mustafa will provide a more general perspective on what is being done in terms of the Zero Pollution Action Plan, and then we have Camilla from Plastics Europe, and then Sigi, which will give us a more broad perspective on the EU programs that tackling the plastic problem. So we start with Mustafa Aydin. Thank you, Mustafa. He's from the European Environmental Agency. He's an expert of the EU Zero Pollution Action Plan. Then we will have Camilla Carteny from Plastics Europe, where she works as a technical project manager. Then Sigi Gruber. Until 2021, Sigi was the former head of the Healthy Ocean and Sea Unit of the European Commission. Now she's retired, but still actively working, too much active, working as a senior advisor for the European Commission. Then we have a session with the LabPlas team. So we start with Cynthia Gómez from the University of Vigo. She's the project manager of the LabPlas project. Then Ricardo Beiras, also from University of Vigo. Ricardo is the coordinator of the LabPlas project, and he has been involved in many other projects before. We then have Glauco Battagliarin from BASF. He's a team leader in a research group there. And then we have Ragas from Radboud University. He's professor, and he will talk a bit about tyre particle emissions. So let's start. We have a very tight schedule. Everyone will have around 10 minutes. So please, Mustafa, can you start and share your presentation?
Of course. Thank you for the opportunity. I'm very glad to be with you here with you today and to present two important EEA products and EU issues, starting from the Zero Pollution Action Plan and holistic marine litter assessment of the EEA, which was recently published. So share the screen in Zoom is going to be a kind of trial for me. We'll see how it goes. So I'm sharing my own screen. Now you should be able to see my presentation. If I did it right.
I think you need to, when you share, I think you need to choose the slide, the window that shows your presentation.
That's interesting. This is the time you should have connected earlier, as you requested from me. So let's see. share screen. Microsoft Edge tab, window. Yeah. I hope you do now.
Yes, perfect.
Perfect.
No.
So EA recently published two important documents. As you know, the European Zero Pollution Action Plan is a part of the Green Deal. One of the strategies of the Green Deal, together with biodiversity strategy, circular economy action plan, which are interrelated with each other. You know that the pollution causes serious mental and physical diseases, premature deaths, and is one of the main 6 drivers of the biodiversity loss. The EU Zero Pollution Action Plan aims to reduce all sorts of pollution which affects the environment and the human health, and respect the boundaries of our planet can cope and create a toxic-free environment finally at 2050. One of the most important targets of the Zero Pollution Action Plan, one of the main six interim targets of the Zero Pollution Action Plan is related with the plastics and marine litter. The action plan aims by 2030 to decrease 50% of plastic litter at the sea and 30% of microplastic releases. This shows how important the plastics issue is for the zero pollution. This is a document. I will later on leave both links of the Zero Pollution Action Plan monitoring and the marine litter report to the chat. I hope you will have time to look at it. They are both very useful documents. This is the link that the EEA is responsible from the monitoring of the action plan and to see how the Europe is doing, is the EU legislation and policy working. So with this aim, at the end of 2022, we published the first Zero Pollution Monitoring and Assessment. This includes 3 dimensions which are interrelated. It's not only the ecosystems. The pollution starts at the source, but in the production and consumption cycles, and then followed by the ecosystems, impacts on the ecosystems and health. These 3 dimensions were assessed in our monitoring and assessment document, with also some cross-cutting stories, because pollution is also interrelated with many domains: air, water, soil. All these cycles, loops affect each other. It's a cross-media story. And we have also, in addition to this, we had some signals to be presented. One of the topics that we were monitoring in the Zero Pollution Action Plan assessment was the plastic pollution in the European seas. We tried to see if Europe is achieving the targets of the Zero Pollution Action Plan. It's obvious that later on also I will give this figure. This is derived from the marine litter assessment report, which are very interrelated with this Zero Pollution Action Plan monitoring. 75% of the assessed European marine areas we saw that are potential problem areas or polluted areas in regards to marine litter, which constitutes the years between 2010 and 21. And when you look at the seas, most of the European seas are under the threat of marine litter pollution. When we look at the targets, we can only say that at the moment for the macroplastics pollution at the European seas, we might be doing well, but for microplastics, we don't have enough data to assess it yet. In addition to the plastics and marine litter problem, of course, the zero pollution documents looks at the other domains like chemical pollution at the European seas or the eutrophication problem. And 80% of the marine ecosystems are problem areas due to chemical pollution in European seas. And 1/3 and 25% exceed the thresholds of nutrient enrichment and eutrophication, which is 99% in the Baltic Sea. In general, the assessment of the ecosystems part of the assessment demonstrates that pollution remains as a serious problem for human health and ecosystems in Europe. Majority of the marine ecosystems contaminated with chemical pollution. And with air pollution, 75% of ecosystems are at risk of eutrophication in Europe. Water pollution has slowed in the last decades, but is now stable for the fresh waters. It doesn't drop anymore since the last decade. Agriculture is the most responsible sector for the pressure over the European ecosystems. Climate change interacts with pollution to impact biodiversity, and persistent pollutants contaminate soils. And we have the problem of the emerging substances, which we cannot even tell you the whole story about because they are new and the monitoring effort is very new. Coming from the zero pollution level to the very connected level to the plastic pollution, EEA recently published a very important report, in my opinion, which brings the first time ever European holistic assessment of the plastic pollution and the marine litter. From source to sea, the untold story of marine litter. We tried to focus on the untold part of the marine litter problem and tried to gather everything from source to sea together. It's a very timely report because at the moment the UNEA effort is to end up with a plastic pollution agreement, which was originally just a marine litter agreement. Now UNEA is also aware of the source to sea assessment of the problem, and the EU legislation is at the moment too much trying to be integrated. As you see at the right table, these directives are day by day increasing. The drinking water directive, urban wastewater treatment directive now also has monitoring in regards to marine litter and plastics. When we look at the data, at the drivers of the problem, what's driving is of course the consumption of the plastic and the creation of plastic waste. Even though the European economy slowed down after 2019 with the COVID-19 effect, we can see that the plastic packaging waste creation is astonishing, is still slightly increasing, which shows a very awful type of coupling that this should be decoupled, that we can solve the problem. The problem is mainly the majority of the marine litter, like 85% is plastic waste, and increasing because of the plastic consumption and the plastic waste production in Europe. And the plastic waste generated in 27 EU countries by person increased 22% in the last decade. The drivers of the problem are the economic sectors, and the packaging constitutes a very important part, close to 40% in Europe. Together with packaging and then small plastic items, this goes up to 60%. And therefore, we focused on this macro problem of plastic pollution in regards to plastic packaging, which needs to be immediately dealt with the policymakers. And the source is the waste leakage. In Europe, every year we produce 3 million, approximately 3 million tons of plastics, packaging waste. And then this 300,000 of it leaks to the environment. If we cannot avoid the leak coming from different sources, from waste management facilities, illegal dumping or littering, then we cannot end the plastic pollution. This plastic leakage, waste leakage, is carried via the rivers, approximately 826 million items into the European seas every year, and then which ends up with the accumulation of the plastic pollution problem in the European seas. At the moment, as I referred before, 75% of the European seas and coastal areas has a pollution problem. As you see, the managed waste and mismanaged waste between 2012 and 18 are both increasing. Our waste management capacity is a good news that it is increasing. We are able to manage more waste effectively. However, at the same time, the mismanaged waste in Europe is also increasing. When we look at the tables, figures by country, you can also go to the link that I will provide and see it by yourself. Compare also your countries. The mismanaged waste, both in very coastal zones, which the waste is too much because of coastal activities and tourism, and also in country-wise, between 2000 and 2012, both the production of the waste and the mismanaged share of the waste increased. So this reminds us the very important zero pollution principle. Once you create the waste, it's so hard to deal with it. It will eventually go to the environment. Prevention should come first. We should have effective solutions at the source. This is the map that shows the hotspot areas, both in Mediterranean and all Black Sea and other European regions. And Mediterranean and Black Sea regions has a huge share of plastics that are coming through the plastic pollution coming from the European rivers. And as the last stage of the puzzle is the European marine litter assessment. With a tool, we overlap different indicators. 75% of the European seas are polluted, the SS areas. And in this policy, this table summarizes the picture, which shows that the numbers at the source and the leakage and the increase of uncontrolled waste, plastic waste, carried by the rivers ends up in our seas, and the numbers we found at the source, the increases at the source, immediately affects the sink and then they can be comparable, and this creates a huge, good puzzle. And after all this study, 3 years of work, we have finally created some recommendations for the European policymakers, but these recommendations are not directly refers to the policy making. To show them a better picture, we came up with suggestions, 10 suggestions, which I have put 5 of them important ones here, on data, on harmonization of the methodologies, on the indicators, that we can provide a better picture in the future to provide the European citizens to and the policymakers, and to move forward more circular economy and decoupling of the waste generation from economic growth. Finally, the dirty secret behind the marine litter is what we call 100% of it, and all of it is preventable. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mustafa. Indeed, it's all our fault. Let's maybe go to Camilla. Are you okay, Camilla? Can you?
Yes, André, thank you. Hello, everyone. I hope you can hear me just fine. As André mentioned, I'm Camilla Carteny, and I'm a technical manager for Plastics Europe, which is the pan-European trade association of plastic manufacturers. I will now try to share my screen, so please bear with me. Okay, let's try this again. Okay, sorry about that. It's not very collaborative. I hope it will become. Okay, I hope now you can see the presentation just fine. Sorry about that.
Yeah, we did the test. And we did the test. Okay, thank you.
Right. So thank you again for the opportunity to speak here. And I would like to just bring you through a journey of all the challenges that the European and plastic industry is facing towards circularity and sustainability, and what are the strategies that we are adopting as the European plastic industry to face these challenges. So as we just heard from our previous presenter, we have many different challenges surrounding the production of plastic nowadays. One of them, which is very important, is obviously pollution. But there are also others, and they are connected to each other in different ways. One of them is to have products that are safe and sustainable by design. So products that contain chemicals or additives that do not cause harm to the environment and humans. Another problem is microplastics. The microplastics are lost from production sites in the form of pre-production resin pellets, but also the microplastics that are generated by the degradation of litter in the environment, or the microplastics that are generated during wear and tear of plastic items on an everyday basis. We also have the problem of waste management or better waste mismanagement, and what is done at a global level, not only the European level, with waste. This is because waste management is not a contained system, and waste is often exported to other countries where different systems may be in place, which just contributes to the problem. Finally, we have the circularity of feedstocks, so reducing the dependency on fossil fuels of our industry and using alternative, more sustainable and circular feedstocks. There are different ways of addressing these challenges, and I will try to just present them to you briefly here. But overall, it's important to remember that all these solutions are not insular. They are connected to each other, and they need to be all implemented if we want to reach the sustainability and circularity goals for 2030 and 2050. We also have established that the next 5 years are critical in terms of window for action. So this is something that we are doing right now, and we will keep on doing, because we know that the time frame for acting is very urgent, and there is an urgency of really trying to implement all these measures together to arrive at the goals that we have for our industry. So first, I would like to talk about additives and microplastics. So we know that there are certain chemicals in plastics. They're called additives. These chemicals are used in plastic production to guarantee the performance of plastic, how it's intended to do. And that's what guarantees, for example, the possibility of having technological advancements or the advancements that we had in the automotive sector, in the medical field, and so on. These are guaranteed by the performance of plastic, and the performance of plastic is due to their additives. Now, according to a recent UNEP report that was just released last week on chemicals in plastics, there are currently 13,000, I'm sorry, on the screen it's wrong, 13,000 chemicals that are identified as being in plastic. And out of these, 3,200 are potentially of concern. And we know that these additives come, of course, in contact with people. Whilst people use plastic items, but they're also released in the environment and so on. And we also know that there is a lack of publicly available and complete information on the additives that are used. There are some databases and some studies that have been conducted and are available in literature, but nothing that completely covers this whole universe of chemicals and plastics. So as an industry, we are committed to a transparency approach, and we understand that we need to make the information available to different stakeholders that are involved in this challenge. And so we are now working towards a publicly available additive database that will contain information over the chemicals that are used to be able to identify them, and will also include ranges that represent the amount that typically is used in a specific application, so a range of amounts over the mass of the final product. And we hope that this will enable regulators to perform risk assessment, because it's fundamental to know what is in plastic to be able to understand its potential risk, and also to implement risk mitigation measures. And at the same time, we hope that recyclers, which at the moment are very often not aware of exactly what is in the plastics that they are recycling, that they will be able to understand what is in the input that they are recycling, and this will ensure the safety of the recycled products. Then for microplastics, sorry about that, the slideshow is not very responsive. For microplastics, we are working on 3 fronts. So the first one, I hinted on it already. We know that there is a release of pre-production resin pellets, which are microplastics, as they are below the size of 5 millimeters, and we need to prevent this completely preventable loss from happening, and these pellets from ending in the environment. And we are doing this with Operation Clean Sweep, which has recently been changed, at least in Europe, to an OCS certification scheme, but I will tell you more about this in a second. We are also an industry stakeholder in different publicly funded projects that research on microplastics, and one of them is LabPlas. So I'm very happy that we will be able to hear more about LabPlas later today. And finally, we are also funding our own scientific research, and this is both in terms of understanding the potential effects that microplastics have on human health, but also on innovating plastic materials to design materials and employ materials in the future that will shed less microplastics during use and after their end of life. So for what concerns pellets, pellets are, according to a UNEP report many of you may be familiar with, the second most abundant class of primary microplastics by weight in the environment. And since they're very small, these characteristics may make it easy to lose them in the environment. And the plastics industry and its value chain has a direct responsibility over pellet loss, obviously. But at the same time, we have control over the inputs in the environment. And this is why we have been implementing in Europe since 2014 an initiative called Operation Clean Sweep, which is a series of principles and rules that can be implemented to reduce or minimize as much as possible the loss of pellets in the environment. Now, since this year, Operation Clean Sweep has moved from a voluntary pledge to a certification scheme. So all of our members are into this certification scheme because it's an essential requirement to be part of Plastics Europe. And we are also involving other trade associations in the value chain and other actors in the value chain because we think it's important to extend this to the entire value chain in Europe. And what this means is that the implementation of Operation Clean Sweep will be audited every year by a third party, which will obviously increase accountability and also availability of data to understand if the measures are working or not. As I mentioned, we are also performing research ourselves through okay, sorry about that. This is definitely not supposed to happen. Okay, I'm really sorry. Basically, my entire laptop is stuck. There you go. So, as I was saying, we also have a project. We are a scientific research project on the effects or the potential effects of microplastics exposure by ingestion in humans. And this project is will last for 5 years, and the consortium of partners that work on it are from both public and private institutes. And one of our main goals there is to improve our transparency and have an open communication of the results. The project also, you can see an infographic on the left on the structure, has an important aim to produce testing materials, microplastic testing materials from our members' commercial grades, so from what will in effect be a more realistic exposure scenario rather than using intentionally produced microplastics or microplastics that are not really realistically generated from the abrasion of plastic items and so on. So overall, again, our goal here is to develop a risk assessment model, and we are not alone in this effort, and we are connected to other industry-funded projects, such as the projects funded by CEFIC, but also to publicly funded projects such as LabPlas. And we really value sharing information, and we know that everyone needs to make their part to achieve a sound risk assessment of microplastics. So for waste management and circular feedstocks, what is the situation currently in Europe? Well, these are data that refer to 2019 for Europe, and they are contained in our report that we publish as Plastics Europe called Circular Economy for Plastics. So what is included in here? The rates of plastic conversion and consumption, and also the post-consumer plastic waste collection, management, and output. And this is data for all the 27 European countries, plus the plastic waste exports of the UK. We also have information over post-consumer recycled plastics usage and to the of the recycled content rate in each plastic application. So very briefly here, more than 10 million tons of post-consumer plastic waste were sent to recycling in 2020, and close to 90% of this were treated within the European borders to produce 5.5 million tons of post-consumer recycled plastics. We had higher process losses, so a part of this stream is lost throughout the process in 2020, and we have two potential reasons of why this is happening. One, probably because of the effect of the COVID-19 pandemic, because there was a very high consumption of household plastics packaging, and also because of the increasing requirements from the market in terms of the quality of recycled plastics and the content of additional chemicals that could be in there. So this is the current situation, but what are we doing to transition this system towards circularity and sustainability? We commissioned to Systemic Consultancy a report called Reshaping Plastics. This is available on our website, but essentially we wanted to quantify the economic, environmental, and societal implications of different strategies that could be implemented to reach circularity of the system, focusing on 4 of the most important plastic using sectors, which are packaging, household goods, automotive, and construction. And how did the report cover this? 6 system change scenarios were described, and then all of them were implemented into a simulation to understand if this could bring us to the targets of circularity for 2030 and 2050 that we have. And also, we wanted to identify which actions should be prioritized for different plastic applications to meet these goals. And what was the outcome of this report? So here on the left, you can see a graph. The current situation is on the very left, and on the right, we have the projections for 2050, and this is the quantity in million tons of waste from packaging, household goods, automotive, and construction. And the blue line, the light blue line on the very big top, basically it's what will happen if we don't do anything. So what is called the baseline for plastic waste. So plastic waste is going to increase from 25 million tons to 35.8 million tons. And how could we instead introduce circularity in the system? We have calculated that we could achieve 78% circularity with 30% of waste avoided through reduction and substitution, which are the very light blue and the slightly less light blue on the top of the graph. And then we could achieve a reduction with 48% being recycled between mechanical and chemical recycling, leaving only 9% to less desirable non-circular solutions such as landfilling, incineration, and of course, mismanaged waste. Here, I want to show you an infographic on paths to circularity that will explain better how do we intend to do this. So our objective is to bring all different types of recycling technologies, so mechanical, chemical, dissolution, and organic, biological, all together because they complement each other on both on the waste side, so the input, and on the product side, so the output. So for example, chemical recycling is aimed to recycle waste streams that cannot generate by mechanical recycling the quality of recycled plastics that are required by the market. So for example, we would be talking about plastic waste that contains compounds that would be toxic in different applications, or the waste that is not of sufficient quality, or waste that has been used in specific applications such as medical application, where it cannot be simply mechanically recycled because it will carry undesirable compounds and also loss of quality in the output. Chemical recycling is really suitable for all these applications, for end applications that need almost or virgin identical quality. So regulated applications such as food contact and medical, or for very technically demanding applications that need to guarantee safety. So for example, in the automotive or in the high performance industries. So only considering the input materials based on the capabilities of mechanical recycling really hinders technology development and innovation. And chemical recycling technologies can really help to eliminate hazardous substances that are present in plastic waste. And then we could ensure the product quality in line with the applicable regulations. With chemical recycling needs to be scaled up to be able to contribute to waste reduction targets and recycling rates. And this is what the plastic industry is really doing in Europe. For example, we have committed to spend 8 billion euros by 2030 with 44 different planned projects in 13 European countries to overall produce 2.8 million tons of chemical recycled feedstock per year. And it's also important to highlight the role of biodegradable and compostable in this, which you can see on the bottom right of the infographic. Biodegradable and compostable plastics are not a solution. They are not a silver bullet to plastic litter, but they have certain applications where they are very useful for their intrinsic qualities, such as, for example, agricultural plastics with mulching films, or applications where the material that needs to be contained in terms of packaging is very dirty or very difficult to clean from what would be conventional plastic packaging. So at that point, it's more convenient and efficient to have biodegradable, compostable packaging. But we need to ensure that this plastic stream is not, let's say, lost or discarded in the environment or composted in inefficient ways, such as with home composters that cannot really guarantee the complete degradation of the compostable plastic. So for this reason, it needs to be really compostable plastics and biodegradable plastics needs to be properly sorted, collected, and then digested. And the output of this can be actually used to, for example, fertilize fields by farmers. So this is, in a way, would make something that is not circular per se, such as compostable, fit into this these circularity paths that we were talking about. It is also important to remember that we really need to be able to trace the carbon through the process and understand what the input and the outputs are in terms of carbon balance. And this is why we need the concept of mass balance, which if we look at chemical recycling, the output of chemical recycling is essentially new feedstock in the form of either syngas or syn oil. And this feedstock can be used for the other processes that are not necessarily new plastic production. And keeping track of the carbon rather than the recycled inputs and outputs helps us trace the carbon throughout the system and also trace how much circularity we are achieving in the whole chemical system rather than only the plastic production system.
Can you speed up a bit?
Yes, that's my last slide, sorry.
Thank you.
So, and this is something that is used already in different industries, such as the sustainable cocoa or coffee markets. So the main takeaways are for additives and microplastics, we want to increase transparency on additive composition and keep implementing the Operation Clean Sweep certification scheme to minimize as possible the loss of pellets in the environment. We will also keep researching the potential effects of microplastics and also how we can innovate plastic materials. And we value very much the collaboration with different stakeholders, including scientific, regulatory, and NGOs. And for waste management and circular feedstocks, we need to implement all the complementary pathways towards the overall system circularity. And we want regulation to enable clear goals and targets, particularly for chemical recycling. And we won't forget mass balance and being able to trace the carbon throughout the system. So thank you very much for your attention. And if there are questions later, we'll have the possibility to answer that.
Thank you, Camilla. Much appreciated. Nice presentation. I will share the presentation now of Sigi, and Sigi will do the presentation. Hello, Sigi. I will share it in an instant, and I will mute myself. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and hello to everyone from north to south, east and west, wherever you are. And I didn't even try to share my presentation because I'm totally hopeless. So I had the privilege that André is actually showing it for me. So thank you, André. I will now really take you on a little journey through what Europe is proposing in very concrete terms now to actually contribute a little bit what Mustafa outlined, which was not very positive, but that's the baseline. So that's where we start. So the EU missions, and one of them is the mission Restore Our Ocean and Waters by 2030. It's not a research and innovation program, but it's a strategic broad mobilization initiatives, of course, with a strong focus on technology, but it's really to test and deploy technology and to see how these solutions can contribute to reach very ambitious targets and objectives, which I will show you with the next slide. So if we want really to restore our ocean and waters by 2030, we have to reach very ambitious targets. And I just would like to focus on the objectives and the targets number 2 of the mission, because that's today's talk: prevent and eliminate pollution of our oceans, seas, and waters. What is planned is that by 2030, if we are going really to successfully reach as well the ambitious targets of the Green Deal, we have to reduce by at least 50% plastic litter entering the sea, the ocean. We have to reduce by at least 30% microplastics entry, and we have to reduce by at least 50% nutrient losses and the chemical pesticides. Very ambitious goals. This go all together with objective number 1, which is protect and restore marine and freshwater ecosystems and biodiversity. And objective number 3, make the blue economy carbon neutral and circular, because the mission is taking a systemic approach. And it is also looking in what Mustafa called the secrets. It's looking at the land and sea connection and the hydrosphere as a whole. Next slide, please. What has been decided is really to roll out the mission in so-called 4 lighthouses at the beginning, because we just needed to start somewhere. So the Baltic and the North Sea will focus on objective 3. The Mediterranean Sea, as we heard as well from Mustafa, thank you, Mustafa, for highlighting that, because it is absolutely necessary there to intervene. That's where the objective 2 is going to focus for the moment. There's the Danube River Basin and the Atlantic Arctic coast, which is looking into marine and freshwater ecosystem and biodiversity, which is very much as well linked, as I said before. And it is really to try out, to test these solutions. And what are these solutions? Next slide. This we skip, we have it already. It's just a reminder. Yeah, the solutions are really as well provided by specific funding provided by Horizon Europe, which is the big research and innovation program of the European Union, focusing, yes, on the Mediterranean, but it's not exclusively focusing on the Mediterranean. They need to be tested in a first phase in the Mediterranean, but at the same time, they need to be tested at least in 5 other sites, places in the EU or beyond. So projects have already been selected, Sea Clear 2.0 and Remedies. I will talk a little bit more about that. Others are in pipeline. The contract will be signed at any moment, and they will also start their work. And the actions are really to prevent, minimize, and eliminate litter and plastic pollution. So also what LabPlas is doing, even if you are not a so-called earmarked project, I know that you have already endorsed the charter, but there are so many other initiatives and projects funded through Horizon Europe, funded through Horizon 2020. And I will also put at your disposal a whole publication where many of these projects can be looked at. And I saw also that Malmström colleagues are online, which also do a fantastic job, which are preventing and remediating litter from the seas. The next call deadline for topics which are published is in September. So if anyone would like to have more information, I can also provide you afterwards more information. Thank you. Next slide. So these are 2 fantastic projects which have been selected. The Remedies project is really raise public interest for saving and for monitoring the plastic and for bringing it really into the mainstream. It's to create a plastic conscious society. What this project wants is to reach out to 250,000 people by actively engage 2,000 citizens. So the scale to replicate is to test in 8 Mediterranean cities, but then really to replicate and scale it up in 50 other places in Europe. Another issue is to collect and valorize more than 422 tons of plastic litter and see how to look into the whole value chain. So fantastic, again, in terms of how can we really take value also of the plastic litter? It's not always only a problem. The other project, Sea Clear 2.0 project, is a continuation of the Sea Clear project, which was already funded under Horizon 2020, and which developed an autonomous robotic system. And this time, the focus, because it is part of the mission, is really couple it, so the autonomous vehicles, couple it, but also with civil society activities, testing, bringing them in, co-creating with them. Again, the valorization of the collected litter and also the link with policy making. So these are just 2 examples I wanted to highlight. As I said, many more are funded and many more can inspire you. And you should actually link up with these projects because they can be replicated, they can be scaled up in other contexts. Next slide. Here again, this is what was published last year. Very soon you will see that the projects will kick off their work, and hopefully we will see fantastic solutions provided through the project work. Next slide. I'm now changing, going from the funding to how can you actually become a missioner? We have developed a mission charter, or the colleagues in the Commission have developed. I'm not representing the Commission anymore, but I'm still part of this whole work. So how can you really become a missioner, a mission part? Next slide. Of the charter. So the mission charter is really meant to mobilize all stakeholders. It is a voluntary exercise, but it is to strengthen cooperation, to align efforts, to achieve critical mass. And that is why this charter is out. And if you are becoming a so-called missioner, you will have quite a lot of benefits. Next slide. First of all, you can send a very clear signal that you also engage and you care about the ocean in whatever functionality you have as a researcher, as a civil society, as an industrialized, as part of Plastic Europe. By the way, Plastic Europe, I'm going to invite you as well to adhere to the charter because you have not yet. So you can really increase your visibility. You have immense opportunities for networking. You have access to improved knowledge and you can disseminate that. You are becoming part of a community of practice. I will show you afterwards, what does it mean to be part of this community of practice? And you can benefit from a whole series now of so-called mission services and from the tools, the different projects which are ad hoc funded to support this have already developed. Next slide, please. So the benefits are, as I said, visibility, networking. You get a whole series of educational tools as well. You have access to the mission implementation platform advisory service. So if you want really to develop in your local community the transition plans for an island, for your local communities, you might need advice. Well, the mission implementation platform is providing you this advice. You can get awards like the ones that will be awarded next week in Palermo. We have the awards for the islands. We will be awards for schools. There are many other awards going in the pipeline for the so-called communities. Next slide, please. So these lighthouse communities are really groups of ports, islands, regions, cities, fleets, industries, philanthropists, investors, university researchers, national research organizations, civic organizations. You see, this is only a little drop. Actually, it is everyone, because if the mission is going to be successful, everyone needs to be involved. And you can, of course, get involved as well. And it's a very easy exercise. Next slide, please. I give you a couple of examples. These are only inspirational examples that might trigger off in your ideas. How can I actually, through my initiative, through what I do in terms of research, become part of the mission charter? But not only, because becoming part of the mission charter, what is it? You actually then adhere to the charter, but you want to help implement the objectives that I have outlined before. So next slide, please. You can, there is a dedicated website. There is a dedicated form that you will have to fill in. It's straightforward. You do explain who you are. You do explain what you can do to contribute to achieve the objectives of the mission. You fill it in, you outline it, you specify eventually also the budget, you explain the timeline, and you submit it. Next slide. Once submitted, it's going to be assessed by the European Commission colleagues. For the moment, this is a very early screenshot, but for the moment, there were only a very few charters. But now there are actively 300 assessed really actions are part of the mission. And the actions are either research of innovation, evidence-based knowledge and data, upscaling, deployment, replication of solutions, citizens engagement, outreach, awareness, education, training, and past actions are particularly past projects. So do it every 10 days. There is a new wave of assessment, and your mission activities will also be published on this website. Next slide. That's where you can find, on the one side, useful links for accessing mission-specific funding for the calls. You also have here the charter submission link, but that is not all. There is much more out there when it comes really to the whole challenge of the plastic. Next slide. But I just, because I didn't want really not to talk about the incredibly important ongoing discussions. Next week in Paris, there will be the negotiation of the United Nations Environment Assembly with 193 members coming together, and hopefully we will go towards an international legally binding instrument. At the same time, there are many now platforms backing this up. I just mentioned the Global Plastic Action Partnership, which has been launched by it was for the World Economic Forum. There are more than 900 now partners engaged in it. There is also the Business Coalition for the Global Plastic Treaty, convened by the Ellen MacArthur Foundation and WWF. And there is as well, I can't see it, the Commission for Environmental Cooperation. This is from the United States, Mexico, and Canada. Last Stop the Ocean. These are only examples because I just wanted to highlight it's not only the European Union, it is a global issue, There are global responses now. And when we talk about the European Union, there are so many other actors which are actively involved. And I do apologize if in the time that I had at my disposal, I did not manage to mention, I mean, mine was only a drop in the ocean. Next slide, please. This is just an example of what the World Bank is doing. It might also be interesting that you go online, you look the pro-blue activities there is money as well available, but also advice services, which is very, very important for many of you online. And the next slide, I wanted to provide you with a short summary. I mean, we cooperate and navigate along and across the Atlantic Ocean and beyond together. But what is really needed is a whole series of general principles, framework conditions, which I summarized. And I would like really to focus on the last one. We need, each of us, a very strong ownership. We need to believe in what we do and what we can do together. And I think that is the essence of how we can really make the changes which are needed. Next slide. And that is why we need all hands on deck. Thank you very much. And last but not least, there will be an event. Registration is open. On the 5th and 6th of July, there is the 10 years celebration of the Galway Statement, which was signed between the United States, Canada, and the European Union, and which launched off the All-Atlantic Ocean Research Alliance. So 10 years have passed now. Join us. It will be a hybrid event. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sigi, for your presentation. So I see there are some questions. I will start to save them, and we will reply to this in the end. So now we pass to the second session with the LabPlas project. We start with Cynthia. Let me stop sharing. Is Cynthia hello?
Yes, hello. Thanks for, oops, I just presented wrongly. Just let me do this again and try to see if I can present it from the beginning. Is this better now? Can you see the?
Yes, yes, you need, yeah, no. It's not in the first slide.
Okay.
Yeah. Thank you.
Okay, so good morning. I just wanted to present a little bit the project. The LabPlas Project is a comprehensive collective effort of 20 groups from 17 different organizations. These organizations include universities, research organizations, and private for-profit entities from 8 different countries. And all of them have different expertise in environmental modeling, in environmental chemistry, ecotoxicology, oceanography, soil ecology. The project started on the 1st of June, 2021. It is a 48 months long project. So right now we are starting the 3rd year of the project, and it will last until the 31st of May, 2025. So overall, the ambitious objective of the LabPlas project is to understand the sources, transport, mechanisms, distribution, and impacts of plastic pollution in order to provide policymakers with the pre-normative knowledge needed to address the highly complex and multifaceted problem of plastic pollution, as has been mentioned by our previous speakers, but based on solid scientific grounds rather than by misperceptions about plastic properties. So in order to achieve this, the project is divided in different work packages. And if anything is clear about microplastics is that right now there is a huge amount we still do not know about microplastics. There is still gap that needs to be filled with knowledge. So to understand the mainland-based sources and environmental pathways in different environmental compartments, what is being done in work package 2 is that they are working towards harmonizing sampling and sample preparation methods for different matrices. And these matrices include freshwater, marine, terrestrial, atmosphere, and biota. And this is being done in two contrasting case studies. One of them is the urban industrial Thames and Elbe river basins that feed into the North Sea. And the second case study is in the Atlantic Merogarces River Basin in the northwestern Iberian Peninsula, which is mainly rural, but it's still highly impacted by highway traffic. So it's impacted by car tire emissions and others. And in the whole project, a special emphasis is placed on the small micro and nanoplastics, because for these information is still limited and they are relevant to ecological exposure risks, as they can be easily taken by, for instance, filter feeding organisms. Furthermore, in the small micron plastics are below the detection limit of most of the currently used analysis equipment. So work package 3 is working towards determining reliable analytical technologies for the extraction, purification, chemical identification, and quantification of these microplastics and their associated chemicals and additives, as Camilla mentioned also, in the environment, including the impact of the microplastics from urban road runoff on receiving waters, as well as analyzing and quantifying plastic zooplankton ratios to be considered as good environmental status indicators. And this is being done by the Sorbonne University, one of the partners of the project. And it's an interesting contribution. Then we have, I'm sorry, I'm having problems finding my mouse in the screen. Then we have work package 4, which similarly to work package 3 is focusing on developing new techniques, but in this case for the sorting and detection of plastic particles in different size ranges, from nanoparticles all the way to large macroplastic detections using remote sensing. So in this work package, lab-on-a-chip device is being designed to sort nanoplastic particles by size and accumulate them in different regions. And with this, the aim is to ease their detection. And at the same time, Air Center that is now hosting this this webinar is using machine learning classification models to classify given pixels of satellite images into the likelihood of those being accumulation of floating marine plastic litter. Work package 5 studies under laboratory and under environmentally relevant conditions the weathering, behavior, degradation, release of chemicals and toxicity of compostable polymers, whilst work package 6 is assessing the impacts of plastics on key species and ecosystems with a selection of standard reproducible toxicity tests that are that use ecologically relevant endpoints and species representative of the different environmental compartments of terrestrial, freshwater, and marine habitats. And this toxicity testing scheme employs a tiered approach where 2 routes of exposure are considered: waterborne chemicals leached from the plastics and also plastic particles in contact or ingested by the organisms. Then all of these environmental and laboratory data collected in the previous work packages is fed to a suite of interacting environmental models that take into account the sources, transport among environmental compartments, and the potential transfer of chemicals to biota to facilitate the mapping and to facilitate the mapping of those hotspots of that are heavily impacted by plastics, and to develop innovative and upscalable models to produce a pan-European plastic information system. All of these, so finally, all of this goes to work package 8, where they are assessing the effectiveness of mitigation measures and promoting scientifically sound plastic governance in order to provide policymakers with the pre-normative knowledge needed to regulate the use and management of plastics on these solid scientific grounds, as we mentioned. So in conclusion, the development of sound policy depends on a solid understanding of the relevant issues and concerns, and thus the LabPlas project is aiming to fill these gaps with new knowledge regarding microplastics in order to contribute in our own little way to achieve the goal of zero plastic pollution by 2050 as envisioned by these many European Union directives and plans. So that's all from my side for today, and I think we can continue with Ricardo then.
Thank you, Cynthia.
It's a pleasure.
Indeed, difficult to resume LabPlas in one short 10 minutes. So, Ricardo, hello. Nice to have you here. Maybe.
I don't know if Cynthia should. Exactly. Can you see?
Yes, we can. Thank you.
Okay, so good afternoon, everyone. Thank you very much, Center, André, and your team for organizing this webinar and for your efficient work. So I will try to present as quickly as possible, hoping that we have some time for discussion then, because several of the previous presentations were very inspiring. I would like to make some questions also, but I guess we stick to the round table later on. So yeah, my presentation will focus on this new concept of small, micro, and nanoplastics. So probably people making research on plastics realize that first, several decades ago, we realized plastics were an environmental issue. Then marine scientists mainly put the focus on micro, on the small ones. And recently, people who follow scientific journals probably realized that we are starting to talk about the small micro, not all micro, but the small one, and especially the nano. So the really small ones, which are, as I will try to explain, the most dangerous ones for environment and human health. So good stuck. Okay. The main philosophy of LabPlas Project is prevention is better than cure. I mean, it's really difficult to take the plastics, and especially the microplastics, out from once they are in the environment. So really the best policies are to prevent introducing more plastic in the environment. And as publication from Abreu and Petrotti put it, if we were to avoid plastics ending in the oceans, the solution lies on land. So that's why we focus on sources rather than on the environment. A few years ago, we all thought that once a plastic bottle was in the environment, it will stay like that for hundreds of years. No? Probably that idea sounds familiar to everyone. Actually, now we know that this is wrong, that conventional plastics do not mineralize, but they do break down into smaller and smaller particles, which are what we call secondary microplastics. So that is the main source of microplastics in the environment is the marine litter. So our philosophy in LabPlas is try to study the origin of this macro litter, the pathways, the transport pathways, and the environmental fate, and try to cut this input from the source. A good part of that job is done in the work package coordinated by Professor Eric Torman from Catholic University of Leuven. So if you're particularly interested in environmental modeling and you want to know more about our work in LabPlas, you can contact him directly. The models are upscaled from studying sources at smaller scales like the Elbe estuary, upscaling down to finally to a E+ model at European scale. Also, models include bioaccumulation in organisms and have implications for human health. That part is coordinated by Todd Wang. So you can refer to them for further information on this modeling part. The second key point is another issue that probably you are familiar with. The size of plastic particles is very important to determine the environmental fate and especially the impact they can have. So we have found, after a comprehensive literature review, and in the right hand you can see the graph, that the smaller the particles, the lower the toxicity thresholds for different aquatic organisms, meaning that the smaller the particles, the more toxic they are for aquatic organisms. So this means that microplastics below 100 microns, which unfortunately normally are not monitored by the classical techniques, the classical methods using plankton nets and manta trolls and this kind of instruments. And these small ones are the ones which actually pose more risk to the aquatic organisms. Not to talk about nanoplastics, which can get across biological membranes. So small size matters. The smaller, the worse in ecotoxicological terms. Obviously, it doesn't mean that we should be concerned only with this small fraction. One of the main problems is that currently we have different scales, different denominations of plastics according to size. In gray colors is the most standard terms, from nano below 1 micrometer, micro up to 5 millimeters, which in our view is a far too broad range of particles, because the fate, the effects, the impact of particles of 1 millimeter have nothing to do with particles of a couple of microns, which are the particles that actually, as Cynthia mentioned, are filtered by filter feeders. No? So we need to, at least to divide this huge classification of microplastics at least into small and large microplastics. Otherwise, it will be very difficult to deal with this concept in terms of environmental risk, because we need to answer the question how risky is this plastics are to the different aquatic environments, and with that aim we need to work with narrower size ranges. Otherwise, it would be very difficult. Obviously, as you go up in the sizes, you can see that effects target all other organisms, such as seabirds, for example. Mostly plastics of a few millimeters, from a few millimeters to a few centimeters, can cause digestive blockage of seabirds. And obviously, larger plastics, especially lost fishing gear, can cause the well-known problem of ghost fishing and entanglement of marine mammals, sea turtles, and large marine fauna. So we have quite a broad range of effects, and we cannot put all in the same basket. We need to study with different techniques, with different approaches, each size range. The smaller are the most risky in terms of toxicology, and the largest cause more impact on macrofauna. So we need a little bit of order in this kind of studies of impacts of plastics on marine fauna. And I would like to bring your attention to the right down corner of the slide, because as I just mentioned, particles below 1-2 microns are the ones which can be translocated from one organ to another, and are the ones which most likely can cause cellular cell damage and interfere with several physiological aspects. So unfortunately, we don't have easy methods to study environmental small micro nanoplastics, but these are the fractions which are more risky. Also, Camilla mentioned the project which Plastics Europe has funded to study effects on human health. And again, these small fractions are the most difficult to target because methods are far more complex, and we run short of instrumentation and instruments to describe, to quantify, and to identify these tiny plastic particles. In LabPlas, that challenge is in charge of Dr. Begoña Espiña from the Iberian Nanotechnology Laboratory, who, as Cynthia mentioned, is trying to develop a device to target this small micron nano in environmental samples. And again, if you are interested in this particular aspect of our research, you can contact her. The third and last key point I will address today so far is the problem of additives, which has been already pointed out by several previous speakers. So as I think it was Camilla who mentioned it very recently, the United Nations Environmental Program has issued a report pointing at this problem of chemicals in plastics. No? So I have been dealing with this and say advocating this subject for quite a long time. So I'm happy to see that this is at last on focus. So you might identify plastics with polymers, but actually polymer doesn't matter in terms of ecotoxicology. It doesn't matter if it's polyethylene, polypropylene, polyestyrene. It doesn't really matter. The problem is the chemicals which are necessary to make those materials functional and useful for all of us, you know, in our homes, in our work, in building, in every field of application of these materials which are essential for our society. So the problem is the chemicals. So there are, as Camilla mentioned, thousands of chemicals that can be included as ingredients. They are not disclosed because that's part of the developments that different companies make to produce better materials. But in my view, we should have at least an idea for public of the list of additives which are inside a plastic material. That information will be probably very, very useful for public in general and for researchers also in particular. Sometimes we need to make very expensive analysis and waste economic resources to have an information which is already known for someone. So most of the chemical additives are completely innocuous, but a few of them are structurally related with some hormones. So they can act as endocrine disruptors, meaning that they can interfere with the signaling and the physiology of all organisms, including humans. So those are the ones which are concerning, especially concerning. Part of this ecotoxicological research is addressed in work package 6 of LabPlas, where apart from our group, we have other teams from BFG, from Germany, from INL, and from BASF. So we are trying to develop ecotoxicological bioassays using aquatic and terrestrial models in order to know the potential impact of the potential risk posed by plastics, both environmental plastics, which is the case of this areas that Cynthia mentioned, and a priori for new materials. And the framework, the methods to assess these are the classical methods of environmental risk assessment. So if we try to deal with the concept of plastic, this is very difficult in science because it's such a comprehensive concept that is to saying, is an animal poisonous? Okay, there are poisonous animals and there are animals which are not poisonous at all. So it's the same, exactly the same with plastics. We need to focus on the chemical additives, which are the parts of the plastic which can be concerning, as this recent report I just mentioned put under attention. And specifically, as most of you know, some phthalates, some plasticizers, bisphenols, alkylphenols are particularly concerning. But again, these are families, large families of molecules, and not all of them have the same impact. So we can know a priori in the laboratory which ones are safe and which ones are not. The methodological way how to deal with this question of how risky are some materials has been developed a long time ago by the US National Research Council, and is called risk assessment. And risk assessment is based, first we need to know whether a material is hazardous, and once we identify the material as potentially hazardous, we do a risk assessment, which consists very quickly in comparing two parameters. One parameter is the predicted environmental concentration, the concentration we model that will be present in the environment, with the no effect concentration, with the concentration that we see in the lab, which is not risky. The closer the environmental concentration is to the toxicity threshold, the more risk that chemical, that material in the scenario we are studying will be for the environment. So this is say the scientific way to answer this question. The problem with plastics, and obviously once we quantify the risk, we can make decisions about changing an ingredient, changing one thing in the material to make it more prone to degradation or not, etc. But the problem is that this scientific way of assessing risk nowadays is very much in contrast with the perception, with the public perception of public about risk of plastics, which is driven not by scientific considerations but by psychological emotions, media, social networks, etc. And so in my view, there is a need, and that's why we make a lot of emphasis that LabPlas produces scientifically sound and solid scientific grounds for plastic governance. Then obviously it's not our role to make decisions, that is for decision makers, for regulators, for agencies, but we as scientists must produce solid scientific grounds for that. Risk perception is mediated by non-scientific information. This is just a very quick example of images taken from internet. So it spans from dummies, plastic dummies, or artistic photographs, which are sometimes wrongly interpreted as real cases, or simply fakes, like the existence of plastic silence, etc. So this is the kind of information which we scientists must contrast with scientific facts. A very quick example, FAO has issued a report explaining that even in worst case scenarios, consuming fish is not risky for health in terms of the amount of plastics that are in the fish. However, most of you probably saw images like this where they associate eating fish with risk related with microplastics, which is, how can I say, diplomatically, is unfounded. Okay, so for synthesis, sorry, André, if I was a bit long. Standard methods are available to assess environmental risk. So we, as scientists, need to use these methods to quantify risk. So far, for the kind of microplastics which are environmentally monitored in the oceans, which, as I said, is the large ones, there is no risk. But obviously, we need to know what happens with the small ones that normally we lack tools to know the actual amounts in the environment. And a priori, these environmental risk assessment tools can help industry to choose among alternative functional additives to choose the most innocuous ones and to produce safe materials. That's all from my part. Thank you very much. Sorry, André, if I was a bit long.
No problem. Thank you, Ricardo. It was very comprehensive. Let's move to Glauco. Hi, Glauco.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, just give me a second. I'll start my presentation. Can you see it okay? I'm going in presentation modus in a second, sorry. There we go.
Yeah, it's okay. Thank you.
Okay, so thanks a lot. Also from my side for having the opportunity to present today. I will say a few words about biopolymers in general and also touch briefly what are the topics that we are covering in biopolymers in the work that is done in LabPlas. Just give me a second to shift the window. There we go. So when we talk about biopolymers, sorry, I forgot to introduce myself. My name is Glauco. I'm Battagliarin. I'm a team leader at BASF, and we're actually coordinating the work package 5 within LabPlas. And together with other partners, as mentioned, so we're looking at the topic of biopolymers and the different aspects that are relevant and connected to that, and the environmental biodegradation. So when we talk about biopolymers, the term is rather generic. So it covers not only the origin of the material, but it also covers the end of life of such a material. When the word biopolymer is used, it can refer to the source. So if it's produced from renewable raw materials, and here you see it on the y-axis. And then the other aspect, it's referred to the degradation. So if this material can actually be metabolized by microbes. And this is actually what you see on the right on the x-axis here. So we can actually have materials that are bio-based, for example, produced by from corn, like bio-PE and biopolypropylene, which are not biodegradable. We can have materials that are produced from fossil resources like PBAT that are biodegradable, however, and then we also have categories that are bio-based and also biodegradable at the same time. But as mentioned, what it's very important to always keep in mention is that the origin of the material doesn't make the material biodegradable. The biodegradability strongly depends on its structure and the ability from the microbes to actually degrade this material. When talking about biodegradability, it's very important to always link it to the environment. So we cannot generically state a material is biodegradable. We should always say it's biodegradable under composting conditions, under marine conditions, and so on. Ideally, and most importantly, if there is a final product, this should be actually certified according to internationally recognized standards. And as mentioned by several other speakers today, the statements on biodegradability should never be an excuse for littering of the products. So what is very important when we talk about biodegradability, commercial claims to actually give a good feeling to the consumers that they can use these products and just dispose them and discard them into the environment. It's not what we intend with biodegradable polymers. It's very important that biodegradable polymers are applied in selected applications where the biodegradability really has a value and not be seen as a generic solution to littering. In LabPlas, as mentioned by Ricardo, so we're looking also into the fragmentation of these materials and what of an impact this fragmentation actually has. And when we're talking about biodegradable polymers, it is very important to differentiate the behavior of such materials compared to the conventional plastics. So conventional plastics usually fragment into smaller items, through mechanical stress or other abiotic factors, for example, UV degradation, and produce fragments which are not biodegradable usually. For the biodegradable materials, the decisive and usually most prominent aspect for the degradation is actually the biological impact. So the microbes colonize these materials, and while degrading them, they actually fragment them into smaller pieces that then are, however, not accumulating into the environment, but then can be taken up by the microbes to be metabolized into biomass, water, and CO2. And how this mechanism looks like usually. So you can see we have a material that is biodegradable. There are specific microbes that see this material as food. They start colonizing this surface, and then usually they start producing enzymes that are able to cleave this material to make it small enough so that these microbes can actually take it up as food source to then metabolize it, and then, as mentioned, utilize it to produce energy, so to stay alive, and on the other hand, also to reproduce and grow, so to produce biomass, what it's called usually biomass. And here you can see that after the biodegradation, the microbes kind of turn green because they utilize the carbon from the biodegradable polymer. Currently, there are, so it's quite difficult to differentiate sometimes for the consumers if a plastic is biodegradable or not. And this is why actually certain labels and standards have been introduced over the years. From the look and feel, the polymers are quite often very similar. And this is, as mentioned, it's very important to label these materials. And there are labels that are based on standards, as you can see here for the industrial compostability. There are also for soil biodegradation, for example, for specific products such as soil biodegradable mulch films. And then there are also other certifications that are based on schemes that have been developed by the certification bodies, such as the biodegradability, for example, for marine and water. What it's important to mention is that behind these testing schemes, there are already rules at the base that cover the biodegradability and the product safety. So to certify such materials, you need to state what are the constituents that you have in your materials. You need to prove biodegradation with standardized test methods and in independent laboratories. And most importantly, also, you do not only need to prove that these materials are biodegrading, but usually you also need to prove that they are safe during the biodegradation process, which means there are no negative ecotox effects during the degradation. Still, there are some fields that need to be covered in terms of research and development, and this is actually what we're tackling in LabPlas. And here I will just briefly show in this slide as an overview what we're actually doing, but of course, I will be happy to answer more in detail what is the work that is currently going on, the different topics that we are touching there. So in the work package, we have five tasks that we are looking at. On one side, the standardization of the methods, for example, for biodegradability, in which we are developing methods, for example, to test the biodegradability of specific polymers into fresh water. Then we have the assessment of the biodegradability of excuse me, of the polymers under different environmental conditions. So we have it in lab and we have it in fields, and we're covering different inocular and also regions, which means we're tackling soil, marine, and freshwater biodegradability. As mentioned, during the biodegradation, it's important also to cover the safety of these products, which is directly linked to the ecotoxicity, as Ricardo already stated before. So we're looking at the impact of the degradation products on the different organisms in the different environments. Then there is also a work package which is directly related to the biodegradation under artificial conditions. And here we're talking about vermicomposting, where the conditions are actually managed to degrade specific inocula, in which we're also looking at the effect of model polymers and how model biodegradable polymers and how they actually behave in the biodegradation. And then finally, also very important aspect is looking at the life cycle assessment to kind of compare biopolymers to conventional plastics and how they actually behave, what are the benefits of these different materials. For example, what is the impact of having a renewable feedstock compared to a conventional fossil feedstock? but also looking at gaps that are present at the moment in the different LCAs, for example, on how to include biodegradability and ecotoxicity into the life cycle assessment analysis. Of course, at the end of the project, as mentioned before by Cynthia and also by Ricardo, the work will be summarized and also transferred into recommendations to legislators and policymakers in general, based, as mentioned, on the generated scientific results. So what is very important, as also Ricardo mentioned, it's always to base the statements on evidence, scientific evidence that has been generated. And this is really one of the very important parts of the project. And with this, I already concluded the short overview about biopolymers.
Great, thank you, Glauco. We are running a little bit late, but let's go, Ad, for the last presentation. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. Thanks a lot, André, for having me. Thanks. I'm Ad Ragas. I'm from Radboud University in Nijmegen, and I'm also participating in the LabPlas Project. And I'm going to tell you a little bit on our research on tyre wear from cars. Yeah, let's just dive into it. So this is a picture from a review we published in 2017 on tyre wear, and it nicely captures the processes involved in the problem. So starting from the tyre, due to the friction between the tyres and the road, particles can get released, and they either through the atmosphere or through the runoff from the water, from water into reach a sewer system, and ultimately the river, and through that the ocean, and even we as persons can get exposed to these particles ultimately, either through inhalation or oral exposure. So what was nice about this, maybe not the fact that these processes occur was already known for a long time, but what was nice about the review is that we started to quantify these different pathways of tyre wear into the environment, and started initially on the back of an envelope calculating, okay, how much is actually released and how much could reach the environment. And then ultimately we calculated for the whole world that 3 oil tankers full of tyre wear could be released ultimately in the environment and reach the ocean, which triggered quite some attention. So it was not triggered by detecting the tyre wear, but mainly by doing simple calculations. The enormous size of the problem was basically revealed, and later then also detected in the environment. People started measuring and saying, okay, yeah, this is serious a problem. Nice thing to know is that this study was initially started by a student from the Open University in a 1-week assignment. So it was not really a serious scientific endeavor, but it later became that. So it was quite a discovery, I think. So what are we doing in LabPlas when it concerns tyre wear? We try to search for solutions. So LabPlas is for a large part focusing mainly on what we call the environmental impact chain. So starting from this tyre, the emissions, the dispersions of the particles in the environment, the exposure of organisms and people, and ultimately impacts there. So what I call the environmental impact chain in a very simple way. But when you start searching for solutions, you also have to intervene somewhere. And then another chain, I think, comes into play, and that's basically the value chain of the tyre. And you need to know a little bit about how tyres are produced, why they are produced, to take appropriate measures. And that's basically, I think, one of the unique aspects of the approach we take in LabPlas, is that we try to do both sides. We try to model the environmental impacts, but we also try to model the value chain and all the actors involved in both chains, and talk to each other in order to basically find good solutions for the problem. So basically the hypothesis of work we are doing there is that collaboration between stakeholders involved in these two chains will result in a more effective and efficient mitigation strategy. And we do this by first developing what we say a common understanding of the problem by mapping this value chains, including all the stakeholders involved in this chain, modeling this environmental impact chain, and then try to quantify all the emissions from the value chain and translate these into impact. So that's all understanding of how the problem is structured. And we then later hope to use these models of the value chain and the impact chain to say, okay, if we now change something, for example, in the production process of tires, what happens ultimately to the impact? Or if we do something like retain plastics when they run off from roads and capture them, what happens to the impacts ultimately? And based on the simulations with these models, we hope to show with the stakeholders come to an ultimate mitigation strategy. So we're currently doing the research, and here is our value chain that we mapped until now, and so which starts on the left side with the production of new tires based on primary resources. Then these tires are being distributed to vehicle manufacturers and to individual resellers. And ultimately, one of the most important phases, of course, is the use of the tire in the car. And then ultimately, after used, it's collected by a company and it's either incinerated used for energy recovery or reused in another way. So along this value chain, all kind of actors are involved. So like tire manufacturers, ATEMA, which is the European branch organization for tire manufacturers and recyclers, environmental organization, but also companies like asphalt construction companies, research institutes. So all these people we try to involve in the mapping of this value chain, and all have a role to play. And they also invited to think about, okay, are we missing important processes, and how much, for example, tire wear do you think is being released at these different steps in the chain? So that we used ultimately to estimate the emissions, and this is then for the Dutch situation, where we kind of made, this is a very simplification of the emission estimation, but it shows that we ultimately identify two important phases where emissions occur. So we discovered that emissions during the tire manufacturing are very limited overall, but the most of the emissions happen during the use phase, during driving the car and the friction. And at the end of life, if tires, at least in the Netherlands, significantly part of that is reused as infill for artificial turf, so for artificial grass. And there also a significant part of the release takes place. So most of it, 1.4 kilograms per tire is released during the use phase, and probably 200 grams, 0.2 kilogram during the infill. So what we're currently doing is trying to upscale this type of information to estimate emissions of tire wear in Europe. We use a quite simple equation for that, with input variables like how much miles a car typically drives, how many cars do we have, what type of car. So we make a distinction between trucks, normal usual cars, and motorcycles. The different types of road type, because it also depends on the type of road surface, how much tire wear is being released, but also whether it's captured in the road surface. And the number of tires, of course, per car, and then ultimately an emission factor. And based on that, for example, we made this type of graph. We can calculate the emission of tire wear per country. Of course, this is mainly because, for example, Germany in this case is first, but that's also largely determined by the number of people. The more people, the more cars, and the more emission per country. You could also do it on a country basis. But this is really the emission, so the release of tire wear particles in per country. But if you then also include sanitation facilities, like how much is removed from, for example, the wastewater through wastewater treatment plants, you see a slight difference. So Italy in Europe becomes one and Germany third, and there are some other. So basically countries with better sanitation facilities go down and others go up. We also comparing tire wear emissions with other type of emissions. So here on the top is tire wear, and the second is pellets, then textile fibers, rubbing agents, and this basically confirms also, I think, also what Camilla was saying, that pellets are also important in terms of weight, but tire wear generally just pops up as the number one source of microplastics in the environment. What we will do next, so this is still to come, is we will develop a model in Europe. So we have a model where we have all river basins in Europe, about 1,500 different river basins included. And we know the locations of all sewage treatment plants and how many people are connected to that. And based on this per capita emission estimate, we're going to model ultimately the concentrations released to the river and transported from the river to the ocean in the hope that we can predict then ultimately the concentrations in the sea. So what were the lessons learned that from the work we've done up to now? I think, first of all, tire wear constitutes a very serious source of tire microplastics in the environment. Secondly, next to driving, the reuse of tire granules as infill for artificial turfs can also be significant, be it a different, a local emission source, at least in terms of mass, not necessarily in terms of particle numbers. Regarding the stakeholders, we noticed that it takes quite a lot of time and energy to build a collaboration with them, to really map all this value chain and to agree with each other on all the processes taking place and the emissions. And hopefully now we can start talking about mitigation measures, about what are appropriate measures to reduce tire wear emissions. What I learned from the stakeholders, and particularly from the tire manufacturers, is that what you hear often as a solution is that, oh, we must change the composition of the tire. Well, what I learned is that it's not so simple, that tire development is a highly sophisticated process, balancing very different criteria like road grip, rolling efficiency, which has to do with energy use, longevity, handling, and comfort and noise. So we don't want to change the composition of a tire and lose the road grip because of that, because that will result in more deaths. So it's not a simple problem to solve. I think adaptation of tire composition really is a long-term process and will not be realized on the short term. What can be done on the short term, I think, is to put some emphasis on quick wins. So just like capturing road runoff, but also stimulating responsible driving behaviors of people, because the more careful you drive, the less road tire wear is being released. And to keep your tires on pressure, because that's also important. The better they are on pressure, the less tire wear is being released. And that was the end of my story. So thanks for your attention, and also a big thank you to the people that contributed to this research from the Open University in the Netherlands and from Radboud University. And if you have any questions, I'm happy to take them later during the roundtable. Thanks.
Thank you, Art. Okay, so this was a set of impressive information and outstanding presentations. It was very good. Thank you for all the speakers. Maybe we can start with questions from the audience. I see that many questions have already been answered, so I will maybe this one from Pedro Pombo, it is about the global dimension. Sigi, would you like to? I think there will be, well, there has been the plastic treaty, right? The global plastic treaty, which is on negotiation. I think it's still in an early stage. But maybe Sigi, could you give some your perspective on this? So the question is, given the global dimension of the problem, is there any kind of cooperation or political interconnection between EU missions and UNESCO, also the Ocean Decade Initiative, so which takes a more scientific approach? So what would be your, so this will also be in the sense of this is a very global problem, so we need really global actions to tackle this. What would be your view on the ongoing global actions for this problem?
But as I said before, and I thank you, first of all, thank you for the question, because it's very important. There are different layers to the question, I think. One is what you just now, André, mentioned. I think the fact that finally, there will be the ongoing negotiation, and there is a willingness really to achieve such a global treaty for plastic. I think that is going to be a major then political governance achievement. Beneath that, there are so many other, as I mentioned only a couple, platforms, NGOs, research groups, industry, which really now are actively engaged. And I think through the plastic trap, the public opinion has also been really sensibilized, which was very, very important. And then, as we just outlined, thank you for the very interesting insights into your projects and how complex it is, because it's just a vast complexity of issues which all need to be addressed. And we do need more research, we do need more insights, we do need more biodegradable, even if there isn't yet, as Camilla rightly said, there isn't yet a definition. But because of the complexity, which Glauco just as well mentioned, how can you come to a one definition? But there are really a lot of interconnections in terms of political government cooperation led by the UN, but also at the different other groupings. There is the Commonwealth as well, for example, working on the plastic charter, and many other groupings. And the EU mission is just as well a way, and it's not only, the EU mission is not only focusing on plastic, but also has a complexity to look into biodiversity and decarbonizing the whole thing, because all this we need if we talk about a healthy environment. And there is a convergence about what the UN decade and what the IOC is really working on, and the EU missions, because there are many EU-funded projects or country initiatives which have been endorsed as decade-relevant projects and initiatives. So you have really the convergence. But I think the more the better, because of the complexity of the problems. And we didn't talk a lot about education, but we need to start really at a very, very early stage. And again, that needs to go into the education systems, into the curricula. We start in kindergarten, etc., etc. So I think there is hope for the future. And with the research that you do and that many, many other groups are doing, and the technology which now have and is advancing, and the testing and the willingness as well from the politician, I think there is, I see it as quite something positive. But everyone has to change as well the way how we use the plastic.
Yes, Sigi, it's definitely a problem that needs, it's a very global, but at the same also very local. We need to engage with these communities because something can start very early. The behaviors of persons. I'm going to now I have here another question from Pedro Tuala, which is, it's for the first three speakers, and it is recently in the news. I learned that recycled plastic can be more toxic and is no fix for pollution. It's active discussion, so I don't know if this is also related with the, user. Should we decrease using plastic? Should we increase recycling? This kind of two distinct aspects. Would maybe Camilla, would you like to give your perspective on this difficult question?
Yes, of course. It's indeed a very interesting question, and it refers to this recently published report from Greenpeace stating that recycling actually does more damage than good. I think there are two phases to this issue. The first one has to do a little bit with what we were talking before about additives, composition of plastics, and being transparent in sharing that information. If we look at mechanical recycling, especially mechanical recycling performed in developing countries, the recyclers have no information over what they are effectively shredding and then melting and extruding in new pellets for then production of other items. And this means that the additives that were in the original products will be combined together and possibly concentrated in the recycled product. And the way to avoid this is, of course, to be transparent with the composition and thus enable recyclers to know what they are recycling and to better sort out the waste streams, to differentiate between waste streams that can be mechanically recycled because they don't have toxic additives or compounds inside them, versus those that instead cannot be mechanically recycled and should rather be chemically recycled, or if that is not possible, incinerated. And that's the first point. The second point is that chemical recycling, by its own characteristics, allows the removal of these any undesirable compounds from the feedstock that is ultimately the product of chemical recycling, which is either synthetic gas or oil. And the way of doing this right now the process is quite energy intensive, and this is true, but that's why we are investing so much money and effort into making it less energy intensive and less expensive, so it can be implemented everywhere to the same standards, similarly to what's done for waste incineration. So not only specifically plastic, but generally waste incineration, to be able to filter out certain compounds from the exhaust coming from the incineration facilities. So I hope it didn't take too much time, but this was just an attempt to answer this question that, as you mentioned, is quite complicated.
Yes. Thank you, Camilo. I don't know if anyone would like to also say something. Otherwise, I can pass to another question. This is this is someone asking if Sigi could share the document with all European Commission funded projects on the plastic topic. I don't know if Sigi, you can do this, or if not, this is...
Yeah, I can. I just have to find it, but it's not all projects. Yes. It was an initiative to analyze a sample, I think, of 40 projects, yes, which have been funded through the Horizon 2020 project, and it's very interesting.
Maybe
yes,
even,
I can, but I need to find it.
Yes, no, but the person that asked this, I need to check, can also contact me, and then I will make sure that the answer goes through. Okay, thank you. So, yes, we need more information about next call, and
the more information, the next course is actually published on the links that I have already shared.
Okay.
And that's the specific for the mission, but then for Horizon Europe, just Google Horizon Europe funding portal, and you will get a wealth of calls, and then it's sometimes actually difficult to navigate around.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you, Sigi, for your help in this. So I would ask if between the panel you have any question for each other. If not, I can throw some questions myself.
Just like to make a quick comment more than a question, André.
Yeah.
May I? One point which is quite interesting in this forum, and perhaps I will write something that perhaps is just because I'm a typical researcher that works in the laboratory, and I'm ignorant of most of the priorities at political level. So Sigi, please take into account that I'm not up to date in the different political initiatives and the different equilibrium and these things. No, I'm just a typical researcher. So I would like to point out that Europe plays a very special role in terms of plastic safety, because I think in Europe we have quite good regulations concerning, in general, environmental issues. So we take care of the environment. We have directives, we have regulations to protect our environment. And at the same time, we import a lot of plastic from other areas, which perhaps these regulations are not that strict, are not that exigent. So in my view, but again, I might be completely wrong, in my view, Europe has the opportunity to play an important role at international level if we would manage to make possible that the plastic we import passes the standards that we wish to have for our own products, for our own environment, for our own citizens. And that's something which has quite a lot to do with the plastic governance work package in LabPlas, where we are trying to produce some scientifically sound recommendations, and those recommendations might be useful for European authorities to perhaps be strict in terms of the quality of the materials we import. I don't know if that makes sense, or is just something a biased perception from my view. But I would like to know your views about this and the other people in the panel. What do they think about this role that Europe could play?
For mentioning this, Ricardo. You're not just only researchers. We need people like you actually to provide the evidence which can then be put forward to the policymakers. But as you rightly said, Europe has high standards, and those standards are directives. Directives need to be normally followed by the different individual member states and transposed into regulations or laws in the respective member states. And that's where, are they always followed, or are some products coming from Asia or from other parts of the world always checked? I'm just highlighting toys, for example, which are not always, I think, at the same price levels. And one also has to ask why. So what is the traceability there of the products used? And how is consumer protection then been regulated in the different countries? So I think, and that's very, very important. That's, I think, the very important issue, and a very complex one, because that's where the individual nations come in. So at EU level, yes, there are the DG, the Director General for Environment, they're issuing many proposals for directives, which are then discussed, the legislator, by the ministers of the European Parliament. And once adopted, then within 2 years, they need to be transposed into national regulations and law. And then they need to be monitored and forced, the imports into that country. I think that's where then trade issues come in, health issues. So it's, you end up in a whole, but it's very important that people are made aware of that. And so your work to say that there is really a danger maybe to health issues, and particularly important as well for children and for young people, by being exposed to such plastic or coating or etc. That's going really to be a very, very important issue. That's where the work of the researchers is so important.
Thank you. Matt, would you like to?
Yeah, I wanted to reflect a little bit, also in response to Ricardo in his presentation, that we the role as scientists in this debate. I think it's important that we show the evidence we have, but I also think it's important that we should be aware, and that has also been demonstrated already in our presentations, I think, that the problem is very complex and that there is a lot of lacking information. And I think when you very strongly kind of put the science, okay, there is no proof of that there's a real risk against the perception of the people, is there is risk that you might fall in the gap, like, okay, people are fantasizing things, and which I think is not true. They are just, you know, they are seeing all these uncertainties and this complexity, having difficulty to understand everything. And I think it's our role of science indeed is to provide facts as much as possible. But we should also always point towards the uncertainties, because it's amazingly difficult to prove that something is safe, and there can always be questions. And my personal opinion is there should also be a role for the precautionary principle. I mean, these plastics that are persistent do not belong in this environment, even when we do not prove that people are dying from it or getting sick from it. I still think we have the responsibility to take action, because they don't belong there. And we know from lessons learned previously that if you put something in the environment that doesn't belong there, that it will trigger change, and which we don't want.
Yes, if I may, yeah, just very quickly. Yeah, I completely agree that this is impossible to prove that something is completely safe. So yeah, I'm aware when I present this slide, I'm aware that sometimes I might be interpreted like I'm saying that there is no risk at all in plastic, which is not the right message. But on the other hand, I have this slide because I think that we have methods to quantify risk. Okay, these methods are plenty of say limitations, and as you said, yeah, there are a lot of uncertainties, and yeah, I'm not saying that these methods are perfect and it's like recording the weight of a person. And then, okay, your weight is 70 kilos. Okay, no, it's obviously these methods are plenty of uncertainties, and that's why they apply uncertainty factors and assessment factors and these things in risk assessment. So yeah, I'm aware of this problem. I'm sorry if but on the other hand, I don't like, as a scientist, I don't like this idea that we should stick to what has been done so far, because we can make progress, we can change some things, we can produce new materials, and yeah, of course, the challenge is that those materials are completely safe. But yeah, I understand, and I try to be as much cautious as I can with this kind of statements, because I'm aware of the uncertainties for sure. Yeah.
Thank you. We are a little bit out of schedule. I don't know what is the opinion of speakers on this. If I can maybe ask one more question or two, what do you think? Or would you like to finish? Okay, I'll if you need to leave, please leave. Don't feel obligated to be here. Camilla, just I can ask one question. You mentioned, and I think Glauco also, that biodegradables are not a silver bullet. Can you expand a little bit on this, because it might seem obvious?
Yes, thank you for the question, and I think Glauco can delve in the technicalities as well, but so biodegradables are not an overall solution for many different reasons, but mostly two of them. One was highlighted by Glauco as well. At the moment, there is no European or even global definition of what biodegradable means applied to plastics. So there are different certifications that mean different things that are released from different entities, private items. There is no publicly supported label, let's say, and this just complicates matters, because items that may be having a biodegradable certification may not be fully biodegradable in the same conditions, or may have differences in their ideal disposal or appropriate disposal rather. And this causes confusion amongst both regulators and also consumers, because when they purchase the biodegradable plastic items or use them, they don't exactly know how to dispose of it. And so what happens is that either they get disposed incorrectly, and so they contaminate other waste streams. For example, they are disposed with conventional plastics, and then an effort and energy needs to be spent to take these out from the stream, or this condemns the whole waste stream to be incinerated, because at that point it's not possible to recycle it anymore. And also for compostable plastics, compostable may indicate that the plastics will degrade fully to base components such as methane, water, biomass, and so on, only in an industrial composter, not in a backyard or domestic composter, because such a composter, so the domestic composter, cannot really guarantee constant conditions for the degradation process. And there is also a very big difference between a backyard composter in a temperate region or in a tropical region, and something instead in the northern regions of the planet. There the microbial community is way smaller, temperatures are lower, and this would just increase the time of composting to up to years. So overall, there is a big confusion of what is biodegradable, what is compostable, and what is not, and this just generates even more confusion. And also, if something is labeled as biodegradable or compostable, there is a matter of perception from the public, where a lot of people will think, if something is biodegradable, if I discard it in the environment or I don't care about it, it will just magically dissolve because it's biodegradable. And obviously this is not the case, but if people are not informed on the appropriate disposal and what biodegradable really means, they will keep doing this. So if we start substituting a lot of applications with biodegradable plastics, we will just increase the amount of litter, and this litter will possibly not biodegrade, because there are many different studies. I also delved in my past on the biodegradability of biodegradable plastics in environmental conditions, especially environmental conditions such as fresh and seawater. And their biodegradable plastics don't really degrade in the same time frame as they would do in an industrial composter or in an appropriate environment. And what this means is that we may just increase our litter problem without any effective solution, because we don't know what will be the effect in terms of, for example, biodegradable plastic, microplastic formation, and what would be the actual timelines for this biodegradable plastic in the environment to fully degrade, if ever. So I think these are the main two problems, and the application of biodegradable plastics should follow, first of all, a regulatory definition of what is biodegradable, and then also applications where this can really benefit would need to be identified, and we already have done some work along those lines. I was mentioning agricultural plastics. That's a good one because for example, mulching films, so those very thin plastic films that are used to cover crops to increase humidity of the soil or protect the crops from the sun rays and so on. They are very often left to fragment with the action of the sun, by photodegradation, and then the recovery would be too annoying or expensive or time consuming, so essentially they are left there and then just plowed into the soil, and that just increases the contamination of microplastics in the soil. Instead, a biodegradable mulching film that is certified to be biodegradable in soil would, once it will be plowed into the soil, would not cause any a persistent microplastic pollution in there. So all of these applications where essentially a plastic object is has very high chances of being lost in the environment or being left in the environment, these are applications where biodegradable plastics can solve the problem. But again, it's not a solution for everything.
Ricardo, would you like to intervene?
Yes, I think this last topic that Camilla raised is very important. I think labels should be related with end-of-life management. So that way, because at the beginning, in my view, there were too many labels with flowers and green things and very nice things, which didn't be really practical information. No, they were commercial advantages, but no practical information. So if labels are related with what must I do with that specific item, it is much better. But obviously it's difficult because each country, even each locality, even in Spain, the waste management is not the same in all parts of Spain. So I guess it's not that easy. But I know I'm being a bit simplistic. But the most is related with waste management, the better. And of course, we need to avoid this impression that if it has a biodegradability label, we can do whatever we wish. Obviously, that's not the case.
Okay, thank you, everyone. Camilla, yes, please. No problem.
Sorry, I just wanted to quickly support Ricardo. Yes, indeed, that's a big issue because we can also not flood the market with biodegradable plastics if there are no collection schemes, and also education for the consumers on what to do with them. But there needs to be also infrastructure and collection schemes that can support that amount of biodegradable plastics to be sorted and put in the appropriate end-of-life management stream. So, and indeed, I can share that as well. In other European countries, there are very big inconsistencies in how compostable or biodegradable waste is collected and managed. And having a biodegradability standard would just streamline this and hopefully allow innovation and new biodegradable products to be put on the market, because there will be a collection network, and it will have also more reason to exist if there were to be a biodegradability definition.
Great, thank you, Camilla. Difficult questions. I'm going to just ask one more question to add, and then I'll come back to each one of you and ask just a final message. Think about this. Maybe what would be the priority measures or actions that you think are more important, because this is such a complex problem that we sometimes we feel that we don't know where to start. If each one of you can think of something while I ask something to add, and you will not have time to think. Okay, you can be the last one to answer in the end. So the question is this about these tyre particle emissions. It seems a particularly difficult problem, right? Because it seems we cannot, we need to drive and we need those tires. And so, as you said, what the main approach now will be first prevention, right? So my question is, how do you see the best way to deal with this problem now?
Yes, I tried to explain in my presentation. I think a lot of people think, okay, we should change the composition of tires, which I think we should look for. But I really expect that will be a difficult solution, which will require a lot of time to implement. If you see how the current tire really is a result of more than 150-year evolution of trying to develop the optimal thing. And yeah, to use biodegradable tires, let's say, not really an option. So I think there might be something possible, but we really need very much new technology for that, and that may only be feasible within, let's say, 20 years or so. So that's one. So that really brings back to basically the only alternative to avoid it is to take the train, let's say, right? It's to stimulate train instead of cars. But if that's not feasible, you have to do to try to capture the particles when they are released, and then as close as possible to the car. So you could even try to develop cars that automatically try to capture the particles that are released. That's the first one, and then the second one is on the roads where they settle, and when you capture the road runoff. And personally, I expect the most from that measure. If you try to capture the rubber particles on the road, in the road, on the side of the road, and I think these techniques are currently already being developed.
Like a vacuum, for example, something like that.
Yeah. So in the Netherlands, for example, we have for highways we have what we call ZOAP, very open asphalt beton. And a lot of the particles actually get captured in the asphalt, and they actually clean the asphalt with water. So twice per year or something, they clean the highways and they suck out all the rubber particles. So in the Netherlands, that's a reason why from the highways, there's relatively little tire wear particles coming off from that.
So we need to create now an economy to tackle the problem, right?
Yeah.
It's also... Camilla, you had your hands up, but I think maybe it's from the last time. Yeah. So okay,
sorry, it was a legacy hand. Really sorry.
Let's finish with one message from each one of you. Maybe who would like to start? Ricardo, would you like to?
Yes. Well, very briefly, because it's quite late already. But yeah, I think it was, at least for me, it was very useful, this meeting, this webinar. Very briefly, I will say that plastics have two aspects very different. One is persistence, environmental persistence, and that can be solved with biodegradable materials. And the second one, which is, in my view, because the first one concerns aesthetical values and these kind of problems, but the second one is chemical safety, and I was glad to hear today that the industry is aware that transparent composition is one of the moves that can be a progress. Also, it will facilitate recycling. So this issue of chemical safety of materials, to me, is very important. And by the way, it's not a problem specific of plastics, because if we replace a plastic cup by a paper cup, but the paper cup is lined with PFAS or whatever, so we don't make any progress in terms of chemical safety. But those two issues are the main things to watch. So I think we have ways to solve both problems. It's complex, but it's possible.
Thank you. Sigi, would you like to give a final message?
Yeah. First of all, Sigi, sorry. I heard
Cynthia.
Sorry, Cynthia.
Go ahead.
Cynthia, okay. Go ahead, Cynthia.
Sorry, I heard Cynthia. No, first of all, I just wanted to say thank you to everyone, and thank you firstly to the speakers for today. And as final message, I just wanted to say, well, Sigi's message, all hands on deck. I think it's a great message. It's a great takeaway. And then Camilla also mentioned she started the presentation with all the different problems. So yeah, we've all been talking about it's a multifaceted and complex problem. So it should be addressed also with different tools. So I think the solutions should be considered. In LabPlas, we say something like a Swiss Army knife, where you have lots of different tools to address all the different problems. And I think when we talk about plastic, we try to put it all in just one bag, but it's actually so complex that it has all these different solutions. And if we consider biodegradable plastics, does not mean that it is the solution, but it's one solution that can be good for one problem. The same with recycling, it can be good for one problem. So let's not demonize solutions because of issues, but at the same time, let's consider all different options and always taking into consideration all hands on deck. And then the last thing that Sigi said is also something that we did not talk about, but education and communication. It's we need to reach to the public, to the general public. Thank you.
Thank you, Sid, and thank you for managing such a difficult and not difficult, such a broad and many persons project. Sigi, please, can you?
No, I just wanted to congratulate you first because after all, this is actually a EU-funded project. I only realized afterwards, and it's great to see how you advance, but how you bring all the different parts together, all your research groups, etc. How you disseminate now your results, which is so important. And it's great that you invited as well, Mustafa, Camilla, really to expose it and to have this discussion. And I think that is what is needed for the future, just to continue to break down the complexity into little things which can be much better understood. I myself have learned a lot, and I'm sure many other people listening have learned a lot. So congratulations. Thank you very much for such webinars. Continue to organize many more, because that is what is needed. And also to the colleagues from the Air Center, Tanya, thank you. You all the time, when something was mentioned, you put it again immediately into the chat so that everyone gets it. I think this is the only way how we collectively can in future really shed light on something which is a threat, but it's also an opportunity. So thank you.
Thank you, Sigi, for joining us, taking your time, valuable time, and giving your precious inputs. So we finish with Camilla. So can we do that now? Camilla, you are invited, so we will be last.
No, I can only echo the words of Cynthia. I think this Swiss Army knife is a nice picture of what we're trying to develop. So there's basically no one solution fits all for the plastics problem. It's very complex challenge, and it needs multiple solutions. And in order to get a very nice Swiss Army knife, I think you need first awareness and education and enthusiasm and research ultimately. And so I think we will make mistakes, we will make errors, but ultimately, if we keep on trying and keep on being convinced that this problem should be solved, we will find the solution together. I'm pretty sure.
Thank you, Camilla. Please give your final thoughts.
Right. I just want to echo what everyone has said. I'm sorry, I know it's a bit corny, but essentially, as the plastic industry, and we are facing all these challenges, and we know that we need help, and we need to have a constant exchange with different stakeholders, scientists, NGOs, members of the general public, and so on, regulators, and to understand how we can best address the challenges that we have in front of us. This is what we want to do with our new direction. We want to achieve a circular and sustainable industry. We want to hit those goals, and we need the collaboration of everyone to make it happen, basically. And also for different solutions that we discussed today, again, they all need to complement each other to achieve the goal. And also these solutions is what we can see now, but in the future we may identify solutions that could work better. And for that, again, we need the help of everyone to come up and exchange with us and tell us what the priorities should be, or if there is something new in the space. So thank you again for the chance to speaking. It was a really interesting webinar, I think. And yeah, that's it from my side.
Okay, Camilla, thank you. Thank you, everyone. One more time. It was a pleasure to be here with you. And thank you for all the audience. I see a lot of message, so it's always good. And well, see you next time. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Ciao.
Thank you. Bye-bye. And good luck for the continuation of the work.
Thank you very much, Sigi.
Thank you, Sigi. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.